Welcome to Beyond Food and Wine, a Cordon Bleu podcast. In this podcast, we get some real insight into the food and hospitality industry from a variety of renowned chefs, industry experts, and Le Cordon Bleu alumni. Join us as we hear the fascinating stories and unique experiences behind some of the best-known names in the industry.
So today, for this Wednesday guest lecture series, hello everyone, thank you. We have Tom Badcock, who's gracing us with his presence today. Tom has worked virtually his entire life with cheeses, and he's in one of the article in the press, he's been referred as the cheese brain of Britain. Alongside a day job of selling cheeses to chefs, he has set about studying this one product to a ridiculous depth and possibly knows more about this product than anyone in Britain. And his association with Cordon Bleu has been a long-standing one, which is still ongoing. Tom, can I ask you to come on board, please? Pretty much all the participants will be very glad to see you, for those who know you and who you have graced your classes with.
I hope they're all well. Is everybody well out there?
So without further ado, I'm just probably, I'll give it to you in terms of just taking the session forward. If you could just go through your journey with the wonderful world of cheeses, touching base on your personal and professional life.
Excellent. Well, a very good afternoon to everybody. It's been quite a journey. So to start with, I grew up in a farm just south of Stratford, down on the Avon, and my parents had many animals, but amongst them were goats, and I would look after the goats along with the pigs and the ducks and the geese and all the other things. But my mum taught me to milk a goat properly. And I go on and make what we did with it, which was pretty odd because we would feed our goats almost anything. We treated them a bit like waste disposal units. So telephone directories, newspapers, everything. A goat will eat everything. So our cheeses were pretty horrific. But I went on. I went to agricultural college. I studied the subject properly. I've worked in industry making cheeses and making butter and some very strange things. And then I came out of college and thought, well, what do I do? So I went traveling and found myself literally standing with a backpack in Australia thinking I ought to earn a living. I'd been robbed on the way out to Australia. And so I had nothing. I had a pair of trousers on and thinking, oh my God, I better be employed very quickly. And so I thought, what do I know more about that somebody will give me a job? And I put an ad out, as you could out there, for a cheese specialist. And I had a job within a day helping people set up, become cheesemakers. It was a kind of a trendy time. This is sort of mid 80s. And so I worked with a number of young startup cheesemakers in Australia, and returning home via Asia, via India and Nepal and so forth, and arrived thinking, well, what do? Do I go and work on my parents' farm? But I really wanted to live in London, and I found myself with a head full of cheese knowledge and no job. What do you do? So I thought I'd sell cheese, and I put an ad out, or I forget how I did it. And nevertheless, I think I phoned a couple of cheese wholesalers, and one of them, a small company called the Cheese Seller, said, "Yeah, come on in." And the cheese seller decided that they would, rather than I will carry a few cheeses and hopefully somebody will like them, reverted that. So they actually went to the top chefs of Britain and said, what would you like us to have? And it was an interesting way around, and it was a very effective way around because the people we were talking to were wonderful. My first customer was Pierre Kaufmann, for example. Nicodemus was another one. Peter Kronberg. Now, these are immense structural chefs. In other words, virtually everybody you know in the top end of the Michelin world today went through the kitchens of one of those three. I mean, yeah, wonderful. So I would drive my van around there, and literally I'd have these magnificent 3-star Michelin chefs come on board, and they knew their product. And I have to say, today's chefs don't know their product anywhere like these guys did. And they would have wonderful sommeliers who would come on, and they had lived and breathed this subject. And I would say, that cheese is mank, isn't it? No, they say, oh no, fantastic. That cheese is going to be gorgeous. What you don't understand, Tom, is what the English have and what we have. It's so different. And this concept of use by date, it's a nonsense. You judge with your nose. And I learned everything really from the beginning again. In other words, I knew structurally how to make cheese, work with cheese. I knew the industry, I knew the cheese making in Britain, but I had to relearn it again from a French Michelin perspective. And wonderful. What a great way to learn. And in those days, the laws were a bit iffy, and we would have cheeses with maggots in, and a bit hairy and a bit scary. And I learned my parameters really around these guys, where you could bend rules and where you couldn't bend rules. You get the idea. So a very, very interesting place to learn. And that was 30 years ago. Since then, these chefs are no longer, I'm no longer driving a van. The cheese cellar has grown very large. We've been bought up. We're now doing, we were doing up to a few weeks ago, about 110 million pounds worth of trays. Our customers are across the world. We look after Emirates, British Airways. We look after Pret a Manger, Nando's. These are wonderful customers to have on board. But it's what the real joy, of course, is if you started 30 years ago, the junior chefs, the chefs de partie, that you name it, that they are now the senior execs, and I've done that journey with them. So it's great to walk into a kitchen and meet people I've known for 30 years, and their journey has been equally upward, and it's been great. A really wonderful 30 years.
Great. 30 years. That's a long association with the cheese.
Long enough with one product. And you think, that's insane. I mean, even the veg man works with more than just leeks. Yes, exactly. So yeah.
Interesting you say that with one product. But if I can ask you, and probably this must be a question for many, and this is certainly one of these questions I have, and probably I might have asked you several times in our association for, we have been doing few things for the last 5 years, on and off. Why do some people love cheese and some don't? And why has it become such a global product?
Oh, I think there's several questions there. But I think if we start with that, what defines a cheese lover? Well, I have to say, I think parents account for a lot of this. You go along and you find that, little Johnny on his way to school has got a laughing cow in his lunchbox. I mean, it's hardly surprising that little Johnny never escalates to an Epoisse de Bourgogne. For those who aren't familiar with this is a good honking French Burgundy master, wonderful cheese. But little Johnny will never get there. Little Johnny hasn't even reached the first rung. In his world, cheeses don't even smell. In his world, cheeses don't change. But real cheeses are dynamic, and they're doing things, and they honk and they sticky, and they have an awe. And as most of you, I believe we've got some wonderful cheese lovers amongst the audience. You need so much more than just flavor. This is something that gets into your head and hovers inside your brain, and it's wonderful. Much more depth to it, but little Johnny never gets there. So I feel that you can't blame little Johnny. That you can blame his parents, but you know what? It's not even his parents' fault. You go out there into the world of suburbia, and all they've got is a Tesco's around the corner. It's not terribly surprising that mum is putting a laughing cow in the lunchbox because there isn't anything else. So I think you have to blame society as a whole. But you could throw the subject, that liking subject, slightly differently and say, right, actually, there are people out there who are not lactose tolerant. They really will react to low levels of lactose in cheese. You can't, that's something. There's other people with casein issues. In other words, casein, the milk proteins in cow's milk will trigger others. I've got other people I know who are triggered by the penicillin in fungus, which of course many of my cheeses have naturally and unnaturally, and this will trigger some people, and I believe them when they say it makes me sick. There's no reason I shouldn't believe them. It makes perfect sense that cheeses have very low levels of penicillin in them, and it triggers people. So there's a number of elements to it, but I suspect the biggest element to why people don't like cheese is that they were never brought up with it. Other people embrace it, and once they start embracing it, I find that they escalate. In other words, somebody who starts liking serious cheese, 2 years later, I find them eating mad stuff, absolutely bonkers stuff. That sort of stuff that you and I would hesitate to eat. People are on a kind of a ladder, and particularly if they're into wines, you'll find they will start off on, a cheese goes very well with a glass of red wine, and very quickly you find them escalating into the dessert whites or the great big white burgundies. You had fabulous big white wines and sherries and whiskies and cognacs, and there's so much more to be had out there once you just open up and you say, well, actually cheese is all about sitting with friends and just getting off your head and just having a great time. It's about spending 2 hours nibbling and talking and laughing. It's a great subject.
Right.
So sorry,
right.
Not a simple answer.
I know. We are talking about some kind of a reference which is so vast in nature that it is very difficult to touch base on everything. But I'll try to kind of make it brief and probably just contain through this for this particular lecture. So you are a person, from last 30 years of experience who has spent a lot of time and energy in understanding the depth of cheeses. You studied a lot. Could you highlight some interesting techniques in cheese making, which you can share with the participants here?
Oh, well, I think the first thing to recognize is how very, very simple it is. I mean, cheese making really is. It is just stirring a milk, and eventually it will go solid. I mean, don't get me wrong, modern milk is so clean, you'll be stirring for several days. Cheese making it's not like, well, I mean, wine has its easier moments too, but there are complicated things like proven bread and making fine baguettes. I mean, that is complicated. Cheese making is simple. I mean, the earlier style, I do nothing and just milk will sour, and then you just take your sock off and you pour your milk into your souring, solidifying milk into your sock. It doesn't get simpler than that. In truth, we have got more advanced. But if we just pause briefly and just talk about simple things like the pleasure it is to teach at the Cordon Bleu, because into that subject you realize, as I sit or stand and teach students, I get given information all the time, and some of them are spectacular and so simple and so wonderful. And it's like, it must be 15 years ago now, a Spanish student put her hand up and said, oh, my mum uses chicken stomachs to make cheese. You think, oh my God, that's so good. So good. I know that chicken stomachs were used to making cheese. I have read the books. I know the Romans used chicken stomachs to make cheese with it with the enzyme, the rennet, pepsin in the stomachs. And yet I've never met a living person who used chicken stomachs. I love that stuff. I love, that kind of, it completes me. The Indian girl who put her hand up and said, my mum, she reduces whey on, well, she was using firewood, and her villagers have just asked her to stop using firewood, to start boiling down well, she had switched to gas, and her villagers wanted her to go back to boiling down her whey on firewood because it made the sweets that she made, the yetost, if you look for a European equivalent, taste so much better when it was slightly burned, slightly caramelized on the firewood, where she had too much control over the gas. I love the way that you'd never know that. You'd never have realized that actually it's the simple stuff that it brings so much color to the subject. I mean, behind me, that's a jamid at the top there from Jordan. And most of the students should be familiar with the jamid, I hope, who've been paying attention. That's a gift from one of the students. I love that stuff. They bring me presents. I get given stuff, and I've had some wonderful times with typically relatives who brought in cheese, and I get to meet them, and we have a lovely, cup of tea, and I get given a wonderful cheese from far, far Central Asia. Wonderful stuff, right on the Chinese borders, and which would never happen if I was teaching somewhere else. You just would not get that lovely mix that you get at the Cordon Bleu.
For someone who's not a fan of blue cheese, do you have a suggestion as a gentle starter? And what wine would be a nice accompaniment to have with?
Okay, it's a good question, and the student hit it on the head. It's really what you're dealing with it to counter it, to balance out the aggression. I would say don't go with a simple one. Don't go. I mean, there's some simple blues out there, Cambozola, for example. I don't even know why it exists. Actually, I do know why it exists, but that's another matter. But I would go with the big blue. Go with a monster, a wonderful Roquefort, for example. But don't amongst the strongest of all the blues. But find before you serve it, go out and find a magnificent honey, and I would point you in the direction of a Spanish wholesaler, somebody like Brindisa, or go to somebody like that. And you can buy the miel de montagne, the wonderful honey from the Pyrenees. Oh, you start to cry. Honestly, the accompaniment, the Roquefort and wild honeys, delicious. Other people might reach for a glass of Tokai, something wonderful, old noble rots, or the great sort of Niagara ice finds and stuff like that. There's a lot of sweet whites out there that go really well with Roquefort. But I would say if you really don't like blues and you're looking for something that almost blankets you, like a kind of comfort blanket, I would say get yourself a nice honey, a really good wild honey, and just try the two, and don't look at it. People are judging with their eyes, and they're saying, "Oh my God, it's covered in fungus." Yeah, it's pretty well penetrated with fungus. We're above that. I'd like to think everybody at the Cordon Bleu doesn't do that anymore, but I suspect a few might.
I think, great, thank you. With wines, probably you mentioned about noble rot. My suggestion would be something in the same lines, maybe like a Sauternes or a Montbazillac from the Bordeaux region. That would be something.
You don't want to go too sweet. You don't want too sweet. I think concentrate on fruitiness and less sweetness. Yes. Yeah, okay. Always a good choice. And I would open 3 or 4 bottles. I mean, what's the point? I mean, look, these are hard times.
Okay, so another question. Best cheeses for cooking and why? Maybe 1 or 2.
There's a few out there. So one of which is to recognize that the older the cheese, the more resonance it's going to give you in terms of your flavors. So you're looking at something and it's got a use-by date 3 or 4 weeks ago. My cheddar behind me was made in 2013. So don't feel shy about keeping a cheese a bit longer than it should. So old cheeses give you depth. Old cheeses that have been allowed to dry off in your fridge because you forgot to cling film them are not the same. If you've allowed them to desiccate, it is not the same as drying. So we're looking at a cheese that has just reached old age, and you'll find that you can grate it. You can bring great depth of flavor. The ancient Greeks would grate all their cheese. I mean, for them, a cheese was a spice. So in other words, you use it's the old cheese that gave the resonance to the dish. But in terms of simplicity and ease, I would grab myself a cheese like a Robuchon or a melting Alpine cheese, raclette, Robuchon, Morbier, and it's a universal product. It is magnificent on toast, mashed potato, a few bits of bacon in a frying pan. Finish it off with a lump of Robuchon, and it collapses and sticks all the bacon together. Magnificent! It's a wonderful dish. So these cheeses are, of course, cooked curd cheeses. They are made for a little bit of heat, and they will bind, and you'll get a stickiness to them. And mashed potato, gooey cheese, bits of bacon. It can't go wrong. So yes, I would go any Alpine, semi-soft, Morbier, raclette, Robuchon. Right, Nitin, what's your next question?
Right. Just onto that. Any special cheese to cook with seafood? Maybe one, just briefly. We'll just swiftly move on to another one.
Seafood. So we're looking at. Can we assume that the seafood is very light and doesn't really want to be swamped? Is that a fair start, or should we go for something that needs finishing under a grill? Because a simple pecorino, or when I say simple, I mean I like it as dry, slightly. You know how they get kind of oxidized, hot, spicy, and I would go for one of those. So in other words, it's been around a long time, and you'll get these with a kind of the skin on the old pecorino, really quite aggressive, chili-ish, and I would grate that on an oven fish, and just got lovely gratin on the top.
A nice flash one. A question here: does vegetarian rennet give an equally good product?
It's a good question. The answer is that we find quite a high degree of bitterness with veg rennet cheeses. It's subtle. You need to have both styles of cheese there to really recognize it. But I would argue that if natural rennet is affecting your judgment on the cheese, and veg rennet is a direction for you, why not? Absolutely. I've got wonderful cheesemakers who are longing for your business, and they make vegetarian rennet cheeses. So the last thing I would do is say, don't eat a vegetarian rennet cheese. However, we find the classic cheeses, really the deeply entrenched medieval cheeses, all made with traditional rennet, and they do lose something when they're veg rennet. And sometimes it's because the people who switch over to using vegetable rennet are slightly more industrial. They're slightly more commercial. And whereas the traditional people are typically the hairy ones, the slightly scary ones, living up in the hills. And they would have never used veg rennet, and they're the real deal. And so we're not really comparing like for like. In an industrial level, you can't compare the Fermier products. It's just not fair on either party. So I would say there are a great many vegetarian cheeses. Well, be careful here, of course. We're talking vegetable rennet, not vegetarian, because milk itself is not vegetarian. So you can't have a vegetarian cheese.
Have you had any luck making dairy-free cheeses?
I've met a lot of casein issued people, and they seem to be able to get through this by avoiding cow's milk cheeses. And now, don't get me wrong, the world is a complicated place, and there are definitely caseins in goats and sheep's milk. But the answer, may be to switch across to goat and sheep. She might also find a difference with age of the cheese. In other words, the casein isn't a static thing. It appears to change in the cheese as the cheese ages. In other words, an old cheddar might well affect Catherine, whereas the young goat cheese, though the casein may be very, very similar, won't affect her. It's only 3 days old. And so I would say, if she could experiment, I think it might open up a whole box of wonderful smelly things for her. I hope it does.
Yeah. Have you tried any cheese that is fermented with Aspergillus oryzae akakoji?
So he's talking, if I'm not wrong, he's talking about the miso funguses, from the Asian miso funguses that are introduced to soybeans to make the advanced tempeh and tofu products. They're wonderful. And there's no reason that they shouldn't actually function. They shouldn't work. In truth, I don't know enough about them to know they're not being used. There aren't any, of course, historical cheeses using them. We would use typically, and they're typically bread related. So in other words, your Roquefort, you find growing in rye, and there's others out there. But nevertheless, so there's virtually no examples that I've seen. But I would suggest that there's a complete direction there to look in, whether they're internal funguses. I don't know enough about that fungus. Is it an inside one, a blue, greys, black, or is it an external one, white, yellows, pinks? You're aware, Nitin, that we've got two families of fungus, one that lives in cheese and one lives on outside. They're both basically, they breathe, they both need air, but their characteristics are quite different. You don't really want a Roquefort on the outside of your cheese. It will be black, blue, but it just won't be happy. You need to keep a fungus happy. And I can't answer for the Asian.
Yeah,
Asian
he was specifically looking for the white fluffy external one.
No, they're typically candidums of one type or another, or the penicillin. I would say it's worth the experiment. Whether you're going to get the depths of flavor, which I suspect he's looking for. He's looking for kind of miso, ramen, the depth of protein degradation. Whether we're going to get it, because the cheese is still young. Don't forget, it's only a camembert is an 8-week cheese. And yet your misos have been fermenting forever. I mean, I don't quite know how long in Southeast Asia you would ferment them for, but months compared to weeks in the world of cheese.
Great.
Next question.
Yes. Tom, there is a lot more questions. We are
far away. Let's have another one.
But I will just kind of drift away from those questions and save it for later. But I would like to kind of dwell into your professional life a bit more.
Okay.
And talk about your typical day at work. Harvey Brockless, you work for them. Please give us a brief of Harvey Brockless. And I know it's a long segment here, which is going to be, but if you can just probably also highlight how the COVID-19 has affected your business and whether it has affected, and if yes, to what extent?
Oh, gosh, yes. Well, look at me now. I'm in a T-shirt. I should be in a nice bow tie. Yes, I partly miss it. I really did need a sabbatical, and I think to me it's given me a kind of a break, and I can go out and down the end of my garden, which I hopefully I'll show you. Let's show you a bit of my garden. Down the end of my garden, beautiful. I had a shed. Now, what you can just work out is something white down there. That's the corner of my grand project. And I love that stuff. It's just a giant Lego project. And I'm building an artist studio down there. So that's another part of my life. So Harvey and Brockless weren't expecting this. No one told us. No one gave us any warning. We are successful, and in part we have been massively hit by our success. So, for example, we look after some beautiful customers, as I touched on, Pret a Manger, Leon, Pod, Nando's, for example. So, if you're trading with these guys, you're doing vast amounts of stock. We at any one time would need to hold about £5 million worth of stock. Now, that means that when the virus hit, the doors closed, no more orders from Pret. What do I do with £5 million worth of stock? Now to throw this a bit further forward, that Harvey and Brockless are specialists. We look after your needs. And you, the top chef, turned around to me and said, Tom, I need to feed, 500,000 people every week on a sliced baguette, and I haven't got time to slice that baguette. It needs to fit into a baguette that is 4 centimeters wide, 16 centimeters long. Will you cut me a piece of cheese to fit into that? And we'll say yes. We'll find a way of doing it. We'll commission that cheese. We'll commission the slicing machine. We will get a slice of cheese to fit into your baguette. Nando's approached us about a year and a half ago and said, look, we've offered chicken wings for many years, and we want something to offer the vegetarian, the non-meat eating half of your family. Don't forget, you go to Nando's with your girlfriend. She might not want chicken wings. What are they going to offer? Well, they said, let's offer something with halloumi in. So we said, oh, okay. Halloumi is a fold. It's a fold of cheese with a gap in the middle. So it's not a product you really want to work with. If you cut that cheese, you're going to get a bit of one half and a bit of the other half, and it'll fall in half. And so Nando said, well, what can we do? And we said, we will find out for you. And we developed a product. It's a Nando's, it's a halloumi finger. So in other words, it's a finger of halloumi, which they deep fry and they sell as halloumi sticks. And we start off thinking, yeah, it could be a good product. It went mental. We are the biggest buyers of halloumi, I think, in Europe, if not the world. Nando's went, but it's not just Nando's. Every decent fast food outlet said, that's a brilliant idea. We'll have some of that. Where do you get it from? Well, you get it from Harvey and Brockless. So all of a sudden, we just have tons and tons of halloumi going through our hands. Wow. The halloumi that we cut for it was commissioned to be a block style, big block. It weighs about 1.1 kilos. And we've developed slicing machines that will feed into. But of course, that means that when the virus hits, no one like Sainsbury's is ready for this. Why would Sainsbury's want a 1.1 kilo block of halloumi? It's totally dysfunctional. The result is I have £1 million worth of halloumi sitting in Battersea. What do I do with it? Any good ideas, guys? Anyway. It's quite long dated. We're optimistic. We're all like Nando's, God bless them, have opened up the doors, and we're beginning to see the churn again, and we're all very excited for the future. And I think we're going to wing it, and we're going to get out of this dreadful thing. In the meantime, we have 500 staff. We've already lost 2 or 3 due to the virus, but nevertheless, the nature of the beast is. We have got the vast majority, myself, on leave, waiting for our moment to return. We've got a skeleton crew, a bunch of very enthusiastic guys who are there in the warehouse. We have normally 3,000 products, and we've whittled them down to about 800. Who'd carry stock when there's no business? So if you're Claridge's and you're phoning up today, and Claridge's are phoning up today because they're feeding the National Health Service, and it's wonderful. They've even got a drive-through food outlet. Brilliant, it's brilliant. But they're needing stuff, and of course we're saying no, you can't have that because it's on our list. But we have something else, and we're showing them what we've got. So there is business out there. It's not the same shape as before, and we're there. And we'll unwind this, unravel it upwards. So we might bring an extra sort of 20 people into work next week, and 50 the next week, and so forth, and expand our range back outwards. But for the best part of 3-4 weeks, we've had commercial waste disposal trucks outside our building, taking tons and tons of cheese and just mushing it out, taking it off. God, those were some horrific places.
Are you working with some charities?
We work with a great many charities. In truth, our products are not suitable. I mean, what would you do with a 16 kilos, big pot of cream cheese? Well, if you're the Ritz, you'd use them for your afternoon sandwiches. But most charities just wouldn't know what to do with that much product. It's just the scale is wrong. It just doesn't work with them. All they wanted was a little, 150 gram jar of cream cheese to put in a box. The decanting process. What sell-by date do you put on a product if you decant it yourself? Of course, the answer is, well, you're not qualified to do it, so don't do it. You'll only go and kill someone. So it is not, moving product is not easy, and we found it really very difficult actually to move product going out of date. Now, throw into this insurance. You might say, "Oh yeah, don't worry, we're insured."
That was my next question.
No, we're not insured. No one seems to recognize that the government closed our customers. The customers didn't want to close. The government told them to close. So in other words, this is orchestrated from the center. And we have all of this problem. It could be addressed by insurance. But at the moment, there's some very interesting legal claims where Hiscox in particular are saying, I don't know whether you're aware about how insurance works, but there's one called business interruption insurance. In other words, something outside of. And they're saying, well, no, viruses are outside that space. We're going, no, it isn't. It's orchestrated. This is a part of this is a bigger thing. And so there's a litigation in place. It's way beyond my pay grade to know how it's going to go. But so, yeah, maybe in 10 years' time, we'll get an insurance pay for this. But at the moment, we're staring at £5 million of wastage. And that alone will break our backs. So we're borrowing money to fill that space. And of course, that borrowing money, I talked to some of the students about this, but actually we make very, very little money. So in 110 million pounds of trade, we might make only £1.5 million of profit, less than 1%. It's on that cusp. But we are a profitable business, and we did have some wonderful customers, and hopefully they'll be back. And in the longer run, it will fix itself. So for my day job, at the moment, I'm building my wonderful project down the garden. My day job normally would be based on the phones and on the internet. Anyone who deals with me like you do realize, don't text Tom because it's a waste of time. Everybody will email me. Just email me. No, don't leave a voice message. Just email me. There's enough systems to confuse me. So just one system, emails, and I will be dealing with chefs asking for recommendations, chefs asking me for better prices, chefs asking me for, Tom, I've got a banquet, I've got 6,000 people coming, what the hell do I serve them? And please, can you portion it to 200 gram pieces, because they'll be going on a banqueting board in the middle of the table. And I'll be jiggering with one chef or another, and it's wonderful. Every day is different. And we spend our times apologizing too. Don't forget, we can balls up just like the next people. So, I will have a driver who breaks something in kitchens, and I will have a forklift driver who will break something as he's loading a truck. That this sort of thing needs an apology somewhere down the line. So I'm a senior guy, and I spent my time telling great chefs that we didn't intentionally piss him off, but that turned out to be what we did.
Hey, you mentioned about British Airways as one of your clients.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether you heard about the news about British Airways just dwindling in size.
Yeah.
Are you expecting a few of the other clients of yours to just
very much so.
Suit?
Very much so. We are not coming out of this virus into a world of the same scale as before. I mean, in fairness, you can see it. You can see it by the sheer number of restaurants struggling to stay in business even before this virus. We are in central London. We are massively oversubscribed with restaurant seats. That completely needs to change. There are profitable models, but you can hear it with the kind of James Italian, the rest of it. It's very easy to expand. It feels great if you're the boss, if you're a worker, if you're in the middle of the maelstrom. The restaurant should never have been opened in the first place. There are just too many similar restaurants, too many formulaic restaurants. You have a bad experience here, you don't go elsewhere. You talk to your 10 friends, in my case 2, or my dog, and we don't go there again. You know what I mean? So there's so much can go wrong, and it's tragic. And
well, I think
there will be great restaurants opening, but it will never be on the same scale as before.
How do you identify a high quality cheese from a lower one?
It's a good question. Of course,
it's very interesting.
Of course, high quality is totally up to is an objective question. I think if we could separate that out with cheeses that I personally like, and to cheeses that I would serve if I was in fine dining, and I was serving a bottle of Petrus over here, and the bottle was 500 quid. What would I serve cheese-wise with of the highest level of wines? I think is the question, really. Well, I would say you're looking at classicism. You're looking at something with a high degree of pedigree. So it's no point showing them a modern construct. It has no nobility. Now, I know that sounds snobby, and I'm not. I really work away from snobbiness. But I think if you've got an absolutely top-end fine wine, you're looking for a nobility that is on the same level as that wine. I wouldn't expect you to serve a dodgy lump of bread. I would expect you to be serving fine French bread with it. But when it comes to the cheeses, so we're looking at nobility. We're looking at a degree of maturity that is outside the retail point. In other words, if I'm a retailer, most of my products will have a 3-4 week shelf life. If we're sitting with Marcus Waring, and we're having a lovely bottle of Big Red, I would expect my cheeses to be at that mark. Now, the question, of course, is what is that mark? Well, some cheeses come ready to go. Year and a half years, that sort of space. People will flog you the 3-year-old one, think, oh, it's magnificent. No, it isn't. It's past that point. And what's dictating that? Well, I think it's about that fact that when I'm sitting after my 3rd or 4th glass of Petrus, and I would say, that cheese is too dry. It needs some more moisture in it. Other cheeses will be sticky. They'll be difficult to serve. In other words, if I'm on British Airways, I would never portion that cheese. It's just impractical. The product sold in Sainsbury's is a 3-week shelf life. The product that I would want to sell Marcus should be in the last week of it. Now, I've got chefs over there who might say, Tom, if I have a product with 3-day shelf life, I'm afraid I can't work with that. I need a longer shelf life. And that's fine. And so my job as a wholesaler is to say, right, I've got cheeses that are in that condition for Marcus, and I've got longer life, firmer, portionable cheeses for those chefs over there. So the cheeses that Marcus should end up with will be resonant. They'll be large. So what does that mean to you, the consumer? Well, I would say close your eyes. Take a nibble of the cheese, the smallest little nibble, and it should just fill your head. Now, you might call that umami. That's slightly simple, but I would say it's resonant like a cello, whereas a young cheese sometimes has no sound at all. It's just a lump, a little laughing cow. It doesn't. There's no noise there at all. So I would look to a kind of size, a dimension. Now, so that is how that little lump fills your head. But then you swallow. and the flavor is still there. It's still in me. And you think, whoa, it's in my soul. In other words, a cello, when the guy stops pulling his bow across the strings, stays in you. It's resonant. It's kind of penetrating in here. And a great cheese does the same. And I talk about so great cheeses have a noise, a different dimension to them. If we get this right, the fabulous wine will also have the same resonance, and the cheese will have the same resonance. In other words, that you and I are enjoying cheese and wine, we don't have to have them one after the other very quickly, because the cheese has got so little flavour. We can take our time. So we'll sit back and talk about Anthony's bad behaviour and all the other things. And we'll have a laugh. And after 2 minutes, we'll have a glass of wine. And in other words, you space things out better when you've got this great ability. So,
thank you, Tom.
So a mixture of an answer there. Sorry, I hope that helps.
It's very generic, and it's very difficult to just put a very specific answer to that. But we have some specific questions. If you can just briefly move on from here. What is the best type of cheese used for desserts?
You see, no, that's a good question. I mean, ricotta for me has a role in a great many desserts. I mean, to me, the Polish cheesecake, which is fluffy and light and not dense and heavy. Now, in that, like an American cheesecake. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a baker, and many of you are much better at this than I am. But to me, most cheesecakes are heavy, dense, over creamy. To me, my favorite cheesecakes are those baked ones that are light, fluffy. Ricotta is playing principal role there, bulking it up, light, very low fat. And I would say it's a great carrier. So in other words, if I was making cappellettis or raviolis, and I want something just plump up my pasta and carry maybe salmon or some other flavor just within it, but not so you wouldn't have just a lump of fish in your ravioli. You'd have a looser, lighter. So I would say I haven't really answered the question because you mentioned desserts, but I would say let's make it simple, make it elemental. So in other words, it's just a body to carry forward a volume and low fat. So ricotta would be my winner on ricotta. That.
Great. The best temperature and places to store the cheeses.
Well, yes, difficult one really. You could be sticking it in a great big fridge, and I think actually at the end of the day that is the right answer. You'll also have the question about cling film. Should I cling film a cheese? Well, only if it's cold. If a cheese is warm or hot, like it's come out of service, it's been out there in service for 3 hours, don't cling film it. It's breathing, it's panting, it really wants to just cool down and let the moisture come out of it. Most of us have got moldy cheeses in our fridges because you cling filmed warm cheeses, and you need to let the cheese cool down and then cling film it, and allowing that kind of effervescent moisture just to come off. Now, what that means for you guys as chefs means you've probably got a box in your fridge. I always go back to those old fish boxes, you know, the polystyrene ones. And there's naked cheeses in there, unwrapped naked cheeses. So when the cheeses come out of service, lift up the box, put them in there. In other words, you don't attempt to wrap them. And the box itself will stop the atmosphere in there drying the cheeses out and stop. You know how your company chef will put a box of something on top of your cheeses? You want a flat surface so the cheeses don't crush on the rack. Because actually, oddly, as a wholesaler, I should recommend you destroy your cheeses. But I would say you really don't want to crush your cheeses. And I've got countless examples of chefs having to replace crushed cheeses from the night before because someone in the morning has put gravy on top of it. You know.
Okay. But going back to the temperature, would you say ideally anything?
No, I would say hold back from what people recommend. in truth, all cheeses should be kept below 10 degrees.
Okay.
There's a sweat point over between 10 and 14 degrees. And it's that sweat point, which means if it's wrapped in cling film, you're going to get mold or moisture and then mold developing between the packaging and the cheese. So below 10, cheeses don't sweat. So most of us are living in the Alps, so 10 degrees or below are just not possible. Today, in this hot room, my cheeses would just be sweaty and horrible if I had them out now. So I'd stick them in my fridge. Well, actually, I'm not allowed cheeses in that fridge. I have my cheese in my garage in there where my wife lets me keep the really scary stuff.
Thank you, Tom. Very briefly, your opinion about vegan cheeses.
Okay, I've got quite a few very valid vegan cheeses. They're really good attempts, credible attempts. I for one, and I think I might belong to a whole group of people, have a problem understanding why you'd make a vegan equivalent of a meat product. Really like saying vegan bacon. Let's make it vegan. It's about as confusing as that. I don't get my head around it. I've got, amongst the best examples, I have a vegan parmesan, I think made out of, I'm not quite sure what, I think it's a peanut or a cashew base. Now, honestly, I think it is cashew based. The result is a madly expensive parmesan. You know, it's 3 times the price of normal parmesan.
How can they manage the costing? The
costing, because unfortunately, there's a category of people who just say, well, let's just buy it. It's only 150 grams. It doesn't look very much. Of course, they don't realize per kilo, it's 3 times the price of normal parmesan. I would turn around and say that cow that made that parmesan had a great life. Wonderful life. You should go out there and watch those cows living. They're very happy beasts. So I would say, let's call them a 5% of your menu that wasn't vegan. And just make sure that they're very happy cows. There are unhappy cows out there, and I'm not sure if I should answer that question. You're going to ask me the question about where are the unhappy cows, but there are some. But as for parmesan, I think most of the cows are quite happy.
Okay. What's the best cheese to make the cheese sauce? But there is other questions, but I'm not going to.
No, there's more in this question than you realize. But of course, it's all about the way caseins, milk proteins, behave in a hot temperature. Well, on the whole, they hate it. And nearly all cheeses made with an acid style. Now, understand that means young goat cheeses. But it also extends all the way through to cheddars, Caerphillies. They have a very high acid element to them. And that means that they hate melting. You get to a point around 55 degrees where the structure of the casein just really doesn't ever become what are we going to call it? An amalgam, a cohesion. To me, I think the answer lies in the Alps. I think you've got to go to the cooked cheeses, meaning the curds set with far less acid than you're familiar with, far less bite on a Gruyere than on a Lancashire. And so it's the Gruyere you want. And we're looking for an old Gruyere. It's going to collapse. It's going to become cohesive. You're going to get an emulsion from your sauce. So we all acknowledge it's not about what it tastes like, it's about everything else. So I would say look for the emulsion, look for a cave-aged Gruyere. We sell a fabulous one, matured and made above Lucerne in a group of caves owned by an outfit called Kaltbach. And Kaltbach, they're slightly insane, and they dug their own hole in the Alps and they bury their cheeses in it. And so Kaltbach Gruyères are typically 18-month, 24-month Gruyères, and they've got fabulous depth. I would like to think of describing a kind of symphonia. Now, we talked about the cello earlier, but I'm talking an orchestral movement, deep, resonant Beethoven kind of music from a big old Gruyere. So don't mess around. If you're a classic chef, don't mess around with your mixing your cheeses. You meet many people saying, oh, I put young cheddar with a bit of Parmesan and it brings a bit of this and a bit of that. I think we're classicists. I think let's go for nobility, go for one answer. Let's go for a cave-aged Gruyere or Beaufort or Appenzeller or one of the great old Alpine cheeses from the Swiss or the French Alps.
Okay. Apart from halloumi, what other cheeses are great for grilling directly on a barbecue?
So the answer is what holds on a kebab? Well, not many. It's a real conundrum. The way halloumi is made by plunging into boiling whey, those proteins are so compressed and so tight by the damage. It's just like bacon in a frying pan. The proteins tighten in on themselves, and it's that tightness that allows me to stick a kebab stick through the middle of it, and it will bind. The proteins are so mangled by the boiling whey, so it'll bind, it'll tighten on its protein. I would say I can't think of any offhand. There's certainly other halloumis out there. I think we should be talking about Chinese cheeses. In Yunnan province, there's a cheese called fan cheese, which is prepared on bamboo. You should Google this, guys. This is one of the rarest cheeses in the world, and they've twisted the cheese around bamboo and they hang it from the roof, and you untwist it and you barbecue it. And I believe, and don't get me wrong, I've not seen it done, but where the stick was drawn from the coil, it's natural that you put your stick in for the barbecuing. So the answer is there's only one that I can think of in the world other than the halloumi, and that's the Yunnan fan cheese, which I'm afraid I haven't. If you'd prepared me for that question, I could have shown you a picture of, but I'm afraid you'll have to Google it.
Okay. We mentioned about some charity and things like this. What are you doing with the cheeses, and also some?
Well, if you could touch on that just briefly, that 6 weeks ago we had £5 million worth of cheese. The vast majority of that surplus cheese is now in a waste disposal unit.
Okay.
And the 6 weeks ago we had cheeses virtually. I just didn't know what to do with it. Now.
Okay.
So we're not carrying a kind of a cheese that we can give away at this stage. We may have cheeses that we can help with, cheeses that cost, that sort of thing. But the days of being able to give cheese away are now behind us. I
have something from Cynthia. One time she saw a cheese with worm inside it. Do people typically use this for cooking, or?
No. It's now several things about this. One of which is it's been banned by the EEC. The banning of cheeses with maggots or worms in wasn't done because it's disgusting. It was done because we're not allowed to eat living creatures by European law. You have to eat a cooked creature or a dead creature. You can't eat the living creature. So we're not allowed to do it. There are a whole bunch of people who basically ignore this. And you'd have no problem in northern Italy, in the Piedmont, Sicily, Sardinia, or in the French in Corsica, or up in the French, maybe not the French Pyrenees, but nevertheless, certainly in Corsica, where people are deliberately encouraging flies to lay eggs in the cheese. They're called many things, but the moussa, are the style of cheeses. And the maggot that's laid in the cheese is called lombrico, and they're jumping maggots. They will spring. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not allowed to buy these. So the biggest problem with this is I'd love to bring them into lectures, and I have historically brought cheeses with maggots in. We can't. Only it's by an accident really. But you've got a cheese with the right maggot in if you try to touch it. Now, don't get me wrong, the maggots are very, very small. They're only about 4 millimeters long. And if you touch it, it would jump away from you. Boing! And that's a lombrico. It's exciting, isn't it? And at that point, you can eat it. They are outlawed. You can't buy them overtly over a counter. You'd need to be talking to your friend Mario, who says, "Oh, Mario, do you think you can get me one of these?" And Mario thinks, "Yeah, I know somebody who makes this," and he'll go and source his cheese. So the question, in theory, will never come up. This is not a maggot cheeses are not available to you as a commercial chef. So they just shouldn't be there. What it is, and should we be worried about maggots? No, of course we shouldn't be worried about maggots. Maggots is just an advanced state of maturity. It's not really that much different from the bacteria or the fungus. Or I also have cheese with cheese mites in. So in other words, a little weevily creature you'll find on many dry cheeses. A maggot is just a bigger version of the same thing. And it will have lived its life digesting the cheese. It is essentially just more broken down cheese, and it will give us more flavors. So when somebody says, "Oh, my old maggot cheese I used to buy in Corsica tasted fantastic," yep, I totally believe that. It just further down the state of maturity than most normal cheeses. So yes, a question with no answer really. That cheese should not be available to you.
Okay, I just want to do a small wrap up by asking you few questions, 3 questions as a quick fire round. Is that okay for you?
Yeah, let's see what the answers are. Yeah.
Okay. What's your favorite cheese?
Oh, let's go for a cheese with a lot of history. In other words, let's go chèvre, the simplest, youngest of goat cheeses, because as we all know, it's the oldest. It's madly old. So here I'm offering something that's a day old, but over here I'm saying that is 10,500 years old. And I love that. They're lovely. That balance of life. Anyway, what's the next question?
Okay. If you want a cheesemaker, what would that become?
What would I make? Well, I have cheesemakers out there, wonderful people that I think, oh my God, I would, to be in his shoes. So for example, Charles Martel, who makes Stinking Bishop. Charles Martel is not a normal person. He lives in a kind of a space of his own. He is a food historian. My whole subject is about reading food history. He is not just somebody who reads. He has the real deal. Out there on his fields, he has a farm in Gloucestershire. He has oxen. He has a plough, which is pulled by the oxen. The guy is the real thing. So he goes out there and practices what he reads. He goes out there and his apple orchards aren't just growing anything. They're growing ancient breeds of fruit. He knows them. He studies this. He makes cheese. Is he going to make a normal cheese? No, he's going to make a product that illustrates the great Cistercian orders of Gloucester Cathedral. And that's cheese.
Okay.
You think, oh my God, that's just wonderful. And of course, what it is a cheese that belongs to fine wines, big ciders, big glass of Calvados. And you might think, well, what are they drinking in Gloucester? Well, they might be drinking cider, but they're probably on beer. So it's slight, let's not blame the good people of Gloucester, but let's worship at the feet of Charles Martel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The favorite chef you work with?
Oh, I have lots. I work with many, but I suppose let's take cooking out of it just briefly because they're great chefs. You just don't hang around for 30 years as anything but a brilliant chef. I look at the way that people manage stress. And years back, we would have a chef who'd throw things at you and abuse you, and abusing people around him to deal with stress. His own stress, he was just taking it out on people. Today, to me, the people who really illustrate greatness are those who just could just take it and delegate it. In other words, bring on junior chefs so that they themselves are now running big hotels. So let's just take a friend of mine, Paul Bates. Paul Bates, exec chef of the Grosvenor House. Mm-hmm. All the way through his journey. I mean, I knew Paul yonks back, working with, long time back, working at the Souffle at the Meridian. And he's no longer, he is now a head chef, he's been bringing forward chefs, and people who work with him are now running 5-star hotels too. He's brought them forward. He's given them responsibilities. He's lifted them, and now they are up there as well. And I just think it's a fantastic journey to be on, giving back to others what you've done. And we both know that man is standing there being given banquets typically throughout September, October, November. 1,000 people a night will be sitting in there. He's working on products that he's got to pre-order weeks in ahead. Does he know the amount of people sitting down? Does he know what they'll order on the night? No. Can he cope with the pressure? Absolutely. Stand tall, be strong, be solid, be graceful and giving. And yeah, there are many.
So the answer is always.
He's one of my great favorites. But I have other people who just, Gordon Ramsay. I've always admired Gordon Ramsay. I've known him right from when he was at La Tonclair, and he's thrown his toys around, and his journey's been slightly different. But look at the man. He was just a working chef, and where is he now? He's one of the top celebrities in the world. That is awesome. That's awesome. You've got to take your hat off. And he hasn't lost it. He hasn't taken those drugs and fallen off like so many did on that journey up there. He didn't stop and say, I've reached my limit. Just how fantastic is that? Oh gosh, there's lots and lots out there. But yes, it's been a fantastic journey.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Tom. What could be the most unique condiment to complement a cheese plate? Something out of the box.
Isn't that a good question?
Indeed it is.
I have you come across people trying coffee with cheese?
Not yet.
Coffee is very complex. And so I would say an old Gouda. This is not invented by me. The Dutch have been doing this for some time. An espresso, old Gouda, or big cheddar, acidic, resonant, lots of proteins falling apart in there, lots of umami, cup of coffee, and it's quite fun. You put it out in front of people, they go, ooh, what's going on, and you can claim credit for it all. It's wonderful. Yeah. So yes, I would say coffee is outside people's space at the moment. But in a few years' time, we all know they'll have caught up and we're moving on. There's no reason why other products like anchovies, chocolate shouldn't work. But I would say for the time being, let's do coffee.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tom. There has been so many comments about this session, an hour of this session with Tom is not good enough or not enough. So tune in for the next session. And until then, thank you all. Thanks, Tom. Thank everybody. Bye.
Very well, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Beyond Food and Wine, a Le Cordon Bleu podcast. Keep up to date with all our news and episodes by following us on social media or by signing up to our newsletter. Links are included in the episode notes. Until next time, à bientôt!